Even more so than going back to your favourite films or books, revisiting your favourite video games offers such an appealing comfort blanket for fans. And this goes double for games in general because they're often replayable by design, with alternate endings, optional playstyles, and secondary missions, all encouraging players to return to a title time and time again. All of this said though, there are some games that a good chunk of fans will never be able to face playing through twice. They're not bad, far from it in all of the following cases, it's just that they were either so demanding, emotionally draining, or so strangely structured that one time through is more than enough. And we've compiled a list of these before, but the following 10 were chosen entirely by you. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 incredible video games you'll never play again, and why, commenter edition. Number 10, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Starting this list off with a bit of a cheat, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a great pick from commenter Whitney Asante, and one of the rare movie tie-in games from 10 years ago that was actually damn good. However, the reason you'll never play it again is simple. It's not actually available anymore. Published by Ubisoft to coincide with Edgar Wright's movie of the same name, the side-scrolling beat-em-up actually boasted the designs of the original graphic novel series, with pitch-perfect sprites of your favourite characters battling through iconic backdrops and delivering their signature moves, all set to some incredible music, of course. Tragically, the game vanished from storefronts and was delisted in 2014 unceremoniously, and Ubisoft hasn't commented on it since. Comic creator Brian Lee O'Malley has apparently tried to get it back, but it's unlikely to ever materialize. Number 9, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The modern Assassin's Creed games are perhaps the biggest examples of quote-unquote content games that you can find. As commenter Seth Rios pointed out, they're absolutely humongous, with it taking anywhere between 6 and 10 hours before you even hit the title screen of latest release Odyssey, stacked with activities to accomplish, story missions to partake in, and freeform exploration to get lost with. That's not inherently bad though, as Ubisoft's most recent entry in particular can be stunning, both in terms of its gorgeous, vibrant graphics, as well as its compelling cast of characters and deep combat. Its sheer size, though, probably means you'll never return to it. As mentioned, this is a game that takes over half a dozen hours to even hit the title screen for, and one which will have half the map unexplored by the time the main story is over, which itself can take upwards of 40 hours. Combine that with a repetitive gameplay structure, and Odyssey is probably a game you'll be playing a lot of, but one you'll return to and chip away at a main save for, rather than experiencing the whole thing from scratch. Number 8, Return of the Obra Dinn. Return of the Obra Dinn is one of the best games of the last decade, telling the tale of the titular doomed ship via ingenious puzzle gameplay. You first step foot on the vessel at the end of its journey with everyone either dead or presumed missing, and are tasked with using a time-traveling watch, just go with it, to return to various still scenes from across the voyage and piece together who each shipmate is, how they died, and most importantly, who killed them. The satisfaction that comes with accurately reporting each person's cause of death is unparalleled, and each chapter of the story is more insane and gripping than the last. As suggested by commenter Edward Stark, presumably not the real one after all of that nasty head-chopping business though, you'll never play it again because not only will you have solved the whole mystery, but 100% completing the game will have you jumping through each memory so many times, analysing every single angle, that you'll have exhausted every scenario and, frankly, become a little sick of them. You might return for the one secret achievement you missed, but for the most part, this game only needs one playthrough to make a lasting impression. Number 7, Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation easily ranks as one of the very best games based on the Aliens franchise, which honestly isn't saying too much when it's sharing space with the likes of Colonial Marines. But one common criticism at launch, and what a bunch of you said on the comments on the last vid, was that the game overstayed its welcome, and that does admittedly affect its replay value. It's not that the game is too long to play again, after all, it only clocks in at about 14 hours, which these days especially is a fraction of most blockbuster runtimes. But it's the pacing that's the real issue here. Alien Isolation takes a while to warm up, and extends itself a good few hours past the natural endpoint. It's never outright bad, but the experience does feel artificially extended, to the point where you get the sense that the devs were worried about players thinking it was too short for the price tag, so they just kept cramming in set pieces. However, while Isolation is probably a one-and-done affair, those extra challenge missions, those things you'll absolutely return to. Number 6, Mafia III. Despite its mixed reception at launch, Mafia III is an amazing game. Well, part of it is. The story of revenge at the heart of it is compelling and presented impeccably, covering Lincoln Clare's brush with the crime syndicate that destroyed his family, as well as his wider conflict with the racism on the streets of New Bordeaux, with visceral combat complementing weighty, speedy vehicular handling. As you all have probably guessed though, there's a pretty big but coming. The thing that drags Mafia 3 down is its open world structure. Perhaps taking the criticisms of the previous games to heart, this third release's sandbox is absolutely riddled with things to do and packed in so much content that the game turns into repetitive box ticking relatively quickly. Put simply, to advance the story, players are forced to complete a bunch of side missions that repeat throughout the entire game. In Isolation, these are actually quite fun, but as commenter Andy B pointed out, the forced repetition makes the idea of a second playthrough daunting. Number 5, Days Gone. Oh, look, it's yet another Josh Brown list with Days Gone at the heart of it. Who would have guessed that I'd be talking about this game yet again? But bear with me here, because Sony Ben's zombie game is actually perfect for this particular angle, because while the release is overall a pretty special experience, it is also wildly inconsistent. And some people must agree as well, otherwise it wouldn't have ended up on this commenter's edition. The main roadblock is the first 8 hours or so of gameplay. This PS4 exclusive is long in the tooth, far longer than I think anyone really expected it to be, and it takes its sweet time to properly rev into gear. The tutorial lasts a lifetime, and it doesn't help that in order to make the late game upgrades seem worth it, your bike at the beginning feels like it's attached to an anchor, constantly slowing you down and forcing you headfirst into trees. The New Game Plus mode, which was added after launch, alleviates some of these problems, but it doesn't stop the repetition that seeps in later, or the weird structure of the story that's introducing main villains 40 hours in. Again, Days Gone is absolutely worth playing if you haven't already, but you're more likely to breathe a sigh of relief by the end than find yourself craving more. Number 4, Firewatch. Like Oberdin, Firewatch isn't only one of the best indie games of the past decade, it's also one of the best games of the last decade, period. It didn't please everyone though, as while it teased a mysterious, supernaturally infused plot for the majority of its runtime, the final reveal was purposefully mundane and ordinary, purely there to draw attention to the realistically flawed characters at the heart of the story. That's both the ace up its sleeve and also the twist that makes playing the game again unlikely. When you know that the mystery is merely set dressing for the character-driven story, all intrigue is kinda lost on a follow-up playthrough, and it's probably for the best to leave the rug pull at the end as the lasting, powerful memory of Firewatch's first couple of hours, which is exactly what Appeal to Reason said in the comments of the last vid. Number 3, Metal Gear Solid 4: Guns of the Patriots. Metal Gear Solid 4: Guns of the Patriots is either the dumbest entry in the entire series, or the perfect swan song depending on who you ask, and I personally err on the side of the second opinion, hence it being in this list. This is a mad game, don't get me wrong, with a story that pays off decades of personal investment in sometimes ludicrously indulgent ways, and other times in a fashion that's genuinely emotional and resonant. It's difficult to describe it as a game that's fun to play though. Sure, the sneaking here is as freeform as ever, and there's a bunch of different routes and tactics to try, but the split between cutscenes and gameplay is the wonkiest in the entire series. Hell, each chapter is bookended by a lengthy cutscene, which can leave you not touching the controller for nearly an hour at a time. And again, don't get me wrong, Metal Gear Solid 3 isn't exactly light on cutscenes either, but you always knew then that when you pick the controller back up, you'd be able to enjoy an extended gameplay section that encouraged experimentation. Sadly, the same thing can't be said for MGS4. It also doesn't help that your only options to play it now are either on an old PS3 or through PS Now, which, trust me, isn't all that great. This hardly makes it all that accessible, which is also what commenter Seb J pointed out on the last video. Number 2, Undertale. Now, you might have taken one look at this and thought, Josh, Undertale is massively replayable, you idiot. After all, there's at least 3 different runs and endings you can get, so it's unlikely you'll only play it once. And while some of that is true, all of those runs are in service of the game's final and most resonant point, that you shouldn't keep playing Undertale over and over again. As a result, I think this is an amazing pick from commenter Vodun. Likewise, there is a great video by HBomberGuy that goes into this theory in far more depth, but essentially every single time you try to squeeze the game for more content and think outside the box for different runs, the characters will literally ask you, don't you have anything better to do? You might just think that's a little fourth wall breaking joke, but it also fits with the message of the main endings. The good ending sees all of the characters freed from their underworld, the player escorted from the game, and a permanent The End screen that can only be removed by closing and booting up the game again from scratch. Then you'll be asked if you want to play again, which essentially dooms the characters in the process by resetting them all and taking away their freedom. Consequently, Undertale champions the idea of loving a game but ultimately moving on, and after that realization, it's difficult to ever go back. Honestly, check that video I mentioned out, it completely blew my mind. Number 1, NieR Automata. Like Undertale, NieR Automata is a game with multiple different endings depending on how many replays you accomplish. Though they are all part of the same main run to the proper conclusion, but it's also a game which ultimately ends on a point that encourages you to put the game down and move on, as commenter Hater Jared pointed out in the last vid. Unlike Undertale though, this time it isn't quite as vague a suggestion. After playing through the stories of 3 different characters, you get to the final challenge, a bullet hell fight against the names of the developers with help from the IDs of other players who've already bested the fight. After you've won, the game gives you an ultimatum. Sacrifice your saved data and let your own ID help other players get to the end, or refuse to pay it forward and hang on to your progress. It's clear which outcome the story is pushing you towards, and once you've sacrificed your save for the greater good, you're left with a sense of finality that most games would never dare to broach. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. There were some great picks from you guys in the comments of the last video, and there were so many that I couldn't put on here, but I think these were the cream of the crop. But either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thank you for watching, thank you for commenting, and I'll see you soon. Bye.